I'm Ava Francis, and this is my reflection number 8 for week 8 for media ethics.
By talking about a little bit of just an overall scope of mass media in a democratic society. So the chapter really wants us to analyze fake news and how it can influence politics and how we can spot that. I think it's really all about the understanding of various institutional roles that media plays in governing, and also how it says in the textbook, it states why the First Amendment is central to them being able to evaluate all forms of political communication through a single ethically based framework. I'm just reading off my notes here, by the way. So one of the things that I just found interesting was an enlightenment vision of the truth, which can be reviewed in chapter 2, has not found a ready replacement in the 21st century. Humanity finds itself in the middle of an epistemological shift, and while we know that truth is complex, of course, no one has a grasp on how to summarize the complexity in a way that spans points of views, methods of inquiry, and honestly, overall, the causes that such complexity must serve. I really want to get into the influence of politics and the checklist for spotting it. Where's my notes? But before that, I'll kind of talk about how, like, unearthing of the fake news. I thought this was an interesting section. One of the most basic tenets of journalism is check it out. This kind of talks about previous eras that has meant double checking what human sources say. I think an application to this in journalism, I think this is one of the most like basic standard things. You should always double check and fact check. I also feel like working in student media is something that it's stressed immensely, and it's really important because this past week we had our managing editor and editor-in-chief have to put out a statement behalf our student-run newspaper because there was I don't know, I guess you could say like an error in the caption on our social media post referring to someone's article that had just come out that was about a really big matter, which right now is Unity Field, and how that is not going to be a place for tailgating, and specifically students of color. That was a place that a lot of people, like I said, specifically students of color, tailgated during football season, rather than the parade grounds with the other Panhellenic frats. So we had to, you have to double check your sources. You have to make sure that what you are saying is not only ethical, but it's not coming off a certain way. So I think that check it out is kind of, it's standard for anything, no matter what you do in journalism, and you kind of have to apply that to your work. But I think that's kind of just a part of a journalistic routine. And if veracity, like said in the textbook, if veracity can be considered an ethical news value, something also suggested in chapter 2, then the sort of investigation of news stories themselves can become a part of your journalistic routine. The checklist you should consider as you're a journalist or someone working in media to develop your own methods for verifying facts, sources, and images is the following. So 1 is look up sources before posting or publishing. 2, check the URL. I think this is a really big one, especially we live in the day of digital media constantly evolving, so having to make sure that the link is correct so you don't have anyone clicking on something random, especially when linking things on Instagram stories and other social media. So yeah, check the URL. Can you tell where the story is from? Read the about page. And then a brief warning: if there is no about page, or if it is not clear who is running the site, be skeptical and double check everything. Sometimes you have to do this yourself as not only a journalist, but I think a viewer and a consumer of media. And I think because we're in the space of putting out the journalism, we can forget that we're also consuming it, so we should be checking it ourselves either way. So yes, a URL is very easy to mess up, so you should just double check. But a URL very much so can be pretending to be a news site or a legit form of media. For example, abcnews.co instead of com is, like the textbook states, a tip-off for bogus content. Analyzing the headline, do the facts match each other, checking the date, checking your sense of humor, and making sure it isn't something that's kind of a parody or isn't a joke. checking your biases. Is the story so outrageous you don't believe it? The list really goes on and on, but those are just the main points. And then it's also encouraged to beware of sudden popularity, which is interesting. And like I said, I think very big living in this digital media and the social media age with viral popularity, it can likely just be fool's gold. So it's really interesting to kind of watch that and see where you might need to look a little harder into the piece of media.
Thing that I wanted to really talk about is conflicting loyalties. Major corporations decide it must reduce its workforce by thousands, and its communication department is told they must release news. A public relations agency decides to accept a controversial new client who may be offensive to previously held clients or some of its employees. And then public affairs officers at a nonprofit agency public affairs officers at a nonprofit agency are asked to explain the decisions of its executive officers to throngs of investigative reporters. These are all examples of things that could happen in real life application in different positions of media. Journalism ethicists have frequently dealt with conflicts of interest from perspectives of news editors, reporters, warning against the lure of freebies, relationship with sources, and involvement in community or activist organizations over the years. These issues have some relevance for practitioners. Their professional conflicts may present a different set of challenges. Nevertheless, practitioners are expected to be Cartesian and in their loyalties, equitable in their actions. They are expected to represent the leadership of the organization. At the same time, they also need to serve as a boundary between the organization and the internal, external, all of those things, publics, ideally seeking to promote harmonious, beneficial relationships among them. I just think that a question that can kind of come up from this is timely disclosure a necessary component of truth-telling, and is a truth told late still a truth? And this kind of just makes you really think about the major ethics in journalism and how fact-checking is really important and the overall scope of being ethical. And then more questions that really come up to mind, because I think when you think of real-world application, and as a journalist or someone working in media, you have to put yourself into these hypothetical situations, especially when they really are real-life situations, and how these things can be applied to real life. So 2 more questions are: how do practitioners ethically balance competing loyalties, and at what point do the reputational risk outweigh the benefits of a relationship? So those are the questions that I will leave you with. Thank you so much for watching this reflection. I will see you in my next one.